Okay, so we all know the name, right? Aaron Hernandez,
Yeah.
NFL star, Super Bowl ring, the whole 9 yards.
Right. Yep.
And then just boom, conviction for murder.
Just this completely crazy turn.
It's wild. And today we're going deeper than just the headlines, right? We're not just going to recap what we saw on ESPN or whatever.
Exactly.
We're going deeper.
So I'm going to take a deep dive.
We're going to look at the documentary, right?
Yeah.
This documentary that's all about Aaron Hernandez, and it's really about like all these complex things, all these complex factors, right?
Right.
That kind of shaped his whole life.
Yeah.
From like his childhood,
his upbringing.
Yeah, all the way up to being a pro athlete. The pressures of that, and ultimately how all that ended tragically.
Yeah, it's a really, really heavy story.
It's intense.
It really makes you think about like nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Like how much was he predisposed to this? How much was his environment? How much was his own choices?
It's kind of that classic question, right? Like how much is fate and how much is
exactly
what we do.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's not just about like a crime.
Right.
We're looking at a whole life here.
A whole person.
A whole person, yeah. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this documentary. So let's dive right in.
Okay.
Let's start at the very beginning with Hernandez's, his journey.
Mm-hmm.
He had, you can't deny he had this just like meteoric rise.
There you go. Absolutely.
Like he was a star athlete in high school.
Standout, yeah.
Standout player at the University of Florida, national champion.
Yep.
Gets drafted by the Patriots, ends up in the Super Bowl.
Come on, that's
like, come on, the American dream.
The dream, yeah, the dream.
But there were these signs, even back then, that, things weren't totally what they seemed.
There were definitely shadows working there.
Lurking, yeah, and the documentary does a good job of highlighting some of that stuff.
Yeah, like early incidents, even back in his college years, you know, like there was a bar fight, a shooting.
Yeah, and these were like red flags, right? I mean,
big time red flags. I mean, these
about his character, about his impulsivity, right? Like,
and these things were happening, even before he got to the NFL.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, right?
Of course.
Like, how much of that was sort of brushed aside,
right?
Because he was so talented.
Because he was this, phenom.
Phenom, yeah. Like people just didn't.
They didn't want to.
They saw what they wanted to see, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
They wanted to see the star, right?
Well, and it happens, right? We see it all the time, especially with celebrities.
Yeah.
We kind of project our own hopes and dreams onto these people, right? And so it's easy to focus on the positive stuff, the shiny stuff, and just kind of downplay
negative
the things that don't fit that narrative.
Yeah.
And with Hernandez, I think his athletic potential, it was blinding.
Yeah.
To those early red flags.
Like they were there, but nobody wanted to see him.
Nobody wanted to see him.
And then 2013, everything changes.
Yeah.
The murder of Odin Lloyd.
Yeah, this was like.
And there's no getting around this. Like this is a major turning point.
Absolutely.
And the documentary really lays it all out.
It does.
The details are, it's intense, to say the least.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then you have the trial, it was a huge media event, like the whole country was watching.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the fact that he was, this famous athlete
right,
just made it even more sort of sensational, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it had all the elements of
a huge drama.
A huge drama, right?
Yeah.
But I think what really stuck with me, and I think what the documentary does a good job of exploring, is like the why.
Yeah, yeah.
Like what led him to this point.
What led him to this point, yeah, because it's not as simple as he did this bad thing, end of story.
Right.
There's so much more to it. So the documentary really goes back to his past to try to unpack some of this. And I think his childhood.
Yeah, it's really revealing.
Really revealing, yeah. And his relationship with his dad, Dennis Hernandez.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about complicated.
Complicated, yeah. Really, his dad was kind of a local legend.
Yeah, he was a football star himself.
Yeah, so he was a role model for Aaron. But then there's this other side to Dennis Hernandez. Like, he was known for being really strict, even violent. And the documentary kind of suggests that growing up in that kind of volatile environment might have had a huge impact.
Yeah, on Aaron.
On how Aaron viewed the world.
Yeah, on his emotional development, right? Like maybe it kind of
distorted.
Yeah, his ideas about, like what's acceptable, what's not, and violence specifically.
Right, because if violence is all,
Yeah.
if that's how you see problems getting solved,
Yeah.
then, it's going to be hard to see it any other way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, what we know about like the cycle of abuse, right?
Yeah.
Like how that kind of dynamic can, play out later in life.
Yeah.
But it's not always a simple thing, is it?
No, it's definitely not a straightforward like cause and effect. But, there's a lot of research out there that shows that, if you're exposed to violence, especially as a kid, it can really affect how you deal with conflict, how you manage your emotions, even, your ability to feel empathy for other people.
Yeah. And, it's not like he necessarily became a carbon copy of his dad.
Right.
But you have to wonder if being in that environment sort of normalized violence
naive.
as a solution.
Right, exactly. Like it became part of his
toolkit almost.
Yeah, like his toolkit.
Yeah, which is, it's a scary thought, right?
It is. It is. And then on top of all that, you have the CTE diagnosis.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That comes after his death.
After his death, yeah. And that just adds
It's another layer.
Whole other layer. Yeah. So for folks who aren't familiar,
right?
Could you give us a breakdown of CTE and
Yeah. So CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Big words, I know. But basically, it's a neurodegenerative disease. Okay, so it's like your brain is deteriorating, and they find it in people who've had repeated blows to the head.
So athletes
in contact sports, yeah.
Football players especially.
Yeah, and the thing with CTE is it can cause all kinds of problems, like, memory loss, confusion, impulsivity, aggression, and in some cases, full-blown dementia.
Wow. And so with Hernandez, the autopsy showed that he had pretty severe CTE.
Severe, yeah. Which basically means that all those years of playing football, taking those hits, it took a toll. It took a toll on his brain.
So are we basically saying that CTE could have contributed to his actions, to his violence?
It's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't say for sure. Like, CTE doesn't automatically make somebody a criminal.
Right.
But the research is getting pretty clear that there's a connection between CTE and things like increased aggression, difficulty controlling your impulses, and just bad judgment.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, right? Like, how much of what Hernandez did was him making a choice versus, the result of this damage to his brain.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It is a tough question, and it doesn't have an easy answer.
No, and it raises all these other questions about, athlete safety and, like, the long-term effects of these sports.
Oh, yeah.
That we love,
Yeah, and I think, what happened to Hernandez, it really forces us to confront that, to confront the ethical issues of, contact sports, especially at the professional level, and what are we going to do to prevent this kind of damage, and how do we help people who are suffering from it?
Yeah, big questions.
Big questions. Yeah, and then on top of everything we've already talked about, the documentary brings up another element. Another wrinkle, yeah. And that's Hernandez's sexuality.
Yeah.
We find out that he was involved in a secret relationship with a guy, a teammate from high school.
Yeah.
And, that just adds another layer of complexity.
It does. It does.
Trying to understand him.
Yeah. And especially given, the world he was in.
Right.
The world of professional sports, which, it's not always the most welcoming place.
It's very, it's very hypermasculine.
Hypermasculine, yeah. There's this pressure to conform, right?
To conform, yeah. And, back then, it was even more so. So you can only imagine, like, the pressure he must have been feeling.
Yeah.
To keep this part of himself hidden.
Yeah, and the fear.
Right.
Of course. The
fear of being found out.
The fear of rejection. I mean, it must have been incredibly stressful.
Incredibly stressful, yeah. So we're looking at this, this perfect storm almost of factors. Right. We have the traumatic childhood. We have the potential impact of CTE. And then this, this whole other burden of a hidden identity.
Right.
And, it ends the way it ends with his suicide in prison. It's just a heartbreaking ending.
It is.
To a life that had so much potential.
Yeah.
but also, was filled with so much darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, that's what makes this story so compelling and ultimately so tragic, right?
Right, because it's not easy to just, write him off as a monster or as a simple case of good versus evil. It's much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think his death, it really just reminds us that there's rarely a simple explanation for human behavior. It challenges us to look at the bigger picture, to consider all the things that might contribute to violence, to, mental health issues, to really try to understand how all these things intersect and influence people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, I think the biggest question that lingers is like, how much control do we really have over our actions, right? Especially when we're faced with, this combination of trauma, mental illness, societal pressures, like all of that,
Yeah, it's almost like, the odds are stacked against you.
Yeah, yeah. And it's something to think about.
It is.
Not just in terms of this case, but just, in terms of life, right? Like how do we
understand?
How do we understand human behavior when all these things are at play?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
That I don't think has any easy answers.
Nope. Yeah.
But it's definitely worth asking.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's definitely worth, thinking about.
For sure.
So that's Aaron Hernandez.
That's Aaron Hernandez.
A story that continues to fascinate, and I think, will continue to fascinate for a long time to come.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
So that's all the time we have for today, but thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
For another deep dive into, whatever fascinating.
Whatever we dig up.
Whatever we dig up next. So until then, take care.
You too.